Thanks, Dolores. Good evening, and firstly I would like to welcome you to UCD, as Dolores has. It's fantastic that you've taken the time on a cold Monday evening to come in and to learn a little bit about what we're doing here. And it is very important for us to roll out these lecture series, and my colleague Lorraine Brennan, this was her idea, and it was an idea in which we could bring our knowledge to you, the public, and this is a public lecture. So the public is the first word in that, and if I don't explain something properly, feel free to interrupt me and to ask me to clarify, because if I haven't communicated properly, that's the reason why you haven't got it. It's not that you haven't got it. And then secondly, feel free to have any questions throughout the 30 or 40 minutes or so. And then there's plenty of time at the end for questions. And again, don't be shy, because you may be damn sure that the question you have, somebody else has as well. So you might as well do them a favor and ask the question. So we'll kick off, and essentially we're going to talk about nutrition and healthy aging. And a couple of questions I want to ask. It's, what do we mean by aging? Does that mean we're talking about when you're in your 80s or 90s? But no, it's not. It's a very progressive. Indeed, you start aging from the day you're born. What I want to focus really on is the physiology and the changes that happen in your body as you get older. And I want to look at that within the context of trying to use nutrition and also lifestyle in terms of attenuating any age-related aches and pains that we all may have and will develop. And I want to understand the extent to which you can reconfigure. I mean, you're never going to turn back the clock. Aging is a natural part of life. However, you can delay certain processes, and it's to get a realistic understanding of what you can tweak and what you can't tweak. And so I'll focus on not only food and nutrition, but also lifestyle and exercise. And really, over the last 2 or 3 years, I really have become to appreciate that, right, nutrition may be queen, but certainly exercise is king, in terms of you have to have that doublet, particularly in relation to healthy aging. So the nutritional needs change over time. The requirements for a baby are very different to that of an adult or a toddler and somebody who's getting older. And essentially what happens is that the rate of growth and repair, or what we call is turnover. All your cells are turning over all the time. They're constantly being renewed all the time. And essentially it's that renewal and the repair component which declines with age. But nevertheless, you can tweak this process, and this can lead to a number of what we call age-related diseases, diabetes, heart disease, etc., etc. And based on your sort of family background and your genes, you may have a family history of sort of heart disease or type 2 diabetes, and you should take account of that background that you have, either in terms of your dietary environment, what you do, what your father suffered from, or your mother, and use that intelligently. And take the nutritional and physical activity advice that is appropriate for you. And that's within the context of this personalized nutrition response, rather than it's trying to give the right diet to the right person at the right time. And we're sort of trying to figure that out. We don't have it all solved, so I'm going to take a high-level approach to this. So data from the UN essentially shows that we all know that the prevalence of aging is increasing. So this is in the year 2000, and this is up to 2030. And you can see, particularly in Europe, that's a very significant increase in the aging population. So between 2015 and 30, 1.1 billion people will celebrate their 60th. The world population over 60 will increase by 1.4 billion by 2030. So essentially it's a 23% increase in the number of people who are in that age category. And that's why it's very important for us to stay healthy for longer. So those older populations, as they increase, we would anticipate that what we call non-communicable diseases, the heart disease, diabetes, things like that, the incidence increase. So that's why it's very important to be proactive and to try to attenuate the rate of those diseases. They will happen, but you can sort of push the boat out a little bit. So in terms of the Irish population, this is really interesting. So this is Ireland in 1950. These are the different, these are the number of individuals, either males or females, who are in the different age categories. So you can see that the people who are above 70 or 80 are in the minority. Look at 2017 and the proportion of people moving up into this age bracket is increasing. But now look in 2050, there really is going to be this bulge. So that's why it's really very important. And that's why I'm saying that whether you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s or 60s, it doesn't matter. All the paradigms that I'm going to explain are relevant to you, irrespective of the stage of life, because it's a continual process. So the hallmarks of aging, as Dolores mentioned, there are loads of genes, molecular processes, cellular processes, and we're trying to dig deep on those. But I'm not going to go on those. I'm going to focus on the high-level components. And essentially, everything health-wise is age-related. In terms of wisdom, I'm still waiting for greater wisdom, which I will achieve with greater age. It may be obesity, type 2 diabetes, and our sarcopenia. I'm going to chat through a couple of the components that we've learned in this space. So everything is age-related, but don't be fatalistic. You can do something about it. But again, that represents the interaction between you and your genes and your lifestyle and your diet and what you may have as potential health issues. So in middle age, what you can do, the big issues really for Ireland are obesity, diabetes and cardiovascular disease. All of you know in this room, you don't need me to tell you what to do. But what I'm going to focus on today is the hows and the why it is important. So you understand the background to the recommendations. So in this context, it's eat less, exercise more. With type 2 diabetes and CVD or heart disease, it's eat better and exercise more. In older age, I'm going to spend some time looking at sarcopenia. That's the loss of skeletal muscle mass, which you get as a natural part of aging. And there's some insights in relation to dietary protein, other diseases such as osteoporosis and cognitive decline. I'm not going to deal with that today, but there will be other public lectures which will be rolled out in that space. And again, nutritional interventions may have their role in that space. But what I'd said at the outset, nutrition is really important, but this physical activity and the synergy between both of them really is the most essential component. So you've got this we've got this difference between chronobiological age, which is your age in years, and your biological age. And some people naturally have youth with them, irrespective of how old they are. And that sort of is luck. And it's luck and it's lifestyle. But it has been demonstrated, with age, both your energy intake and your energy requirements decline. But that doesn't mean you eat less, but in fact you actually have to eat more. And I'm going to take a couple of minutes to explain that. So this graph here, it essentially shows the amount of energy which people eat, whether you're a man in a solid bar or a woman. And from the age of 10, going up in decades to the age of 70, you can see that your requirements, so a teenager or a 20-year-old will need 4,000 calories. Whereas that declines, and that you don't get the same increase and decrease with females, but you still get it. Now, even though your energy intake and your energy requirements change and go down, you actually need more. So you really do need to think about eating better rather than less as you're getting older. And one of the reasons why you reduce the amount that you eat, there's a lot to do with food physiology. So older adults, you naturally have less of an appetite. And that's just because your sensory system isn't quite as attuned as it usually would be. If you're a smoker as well, that sort of sense of taste and smell, that sort of declines even more. And also older adults eat about 25% lower energy in between a 40-year-old versus a 70-year-old. And the factors that affect that age effect are sight and smell, taste, your appetite, your hormones. And that's in relation to physiology, as in your body needs less because you've got less skeletal muscle. However, you still need the enrichment of the micronutrients, the proteins in the diet, because it's not all energy. Also, the way in which we can digest and absorb food can attenuate. So the rate at which your body can split down proteins in your stomach, or the rate at which you can chew, that significantly declines in age. So there's lots of physiological and sensory reasons. Also in your body, you will see, essentially I want to take a moment to talk about physiology. So your adipose tissue, or your fat tissue, your bones, and your skeletal muscle. So as you get older, or as you grow, you can be in a growth phase, which is up to about the early 20s. You're in a maintenance phase, which is between your 20s and, say, mid-50s. And then you're in a declining phase, not being negative, but anyhow, over 60. So essentially everything goes up here, so your bone mass goes up, and that's great, and the higher it goes up to start with, then there's a lower risk of you developing osteoporosis, because if you have a high bone mass at the start, then it will decline, but that'll be gradual. With skeletal muscle mass, again, that increases and declines with age. And also muscle mass, the strength and functionality, so how strong your muscles are. Okay, are you able to lift something? You will often see with somebody who's a little bit older, they'll find it hard to sit out of a chair. And that's just because their thighs are not as strong as they were. And however, fat mass, that tends to increase with age, and it tends to move up in the body. And that is just part of normal physiology. But it's not that you can stop this process, but you can adjust these processes. And I'm going to talk to you a lot about protein. I'm going to talk to you a lot about adipose tissue or fat tissue. And there is an extent to which you can remodel that. And essentially what you want to do as you go along here is keep that muscle mass there for as long as you can. And you keep that fat mass down there for as long as you can. And then that will push some of the very common diseases, as it were. So these are, within the context of obesity, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I want you to think of your waist rather than just weight, okay? This is an MRI, which is an image of a man who's not overweight. But you see here in red, that is essentially visceral or central adipose tissue, okay? That central adipose tissue, even though he's got a nearly normal BMI or body mass index, he is in much more trouble than this man here who is overweight and obese. However, you'll see that the fat, which is in blue, is in subcutaneous. It's just under the skin, and that is a healthy fat. Also, you'll see that his muscles are much bigger compared to these little skinny legs here. Okay? So just because don't just think about your weight. Think about your waist circumference. And as a rule of thumb, think of 3 figures. If you're over 100 centimeters or over 40 inches, you're in trouble. Now, seeing all of you coming in today, nobody was in that category, okay? But even if you're sort of over 37 inches of your waist size as a man, and it's really around where your belly button is, or say 31 inches in females, then you should think about your waist, but don't necessarily think about weight, because we want you to carry the skeletal muscle, which is important, but just reduce where the bad fat, as it were, in your body. So eating better, but not necessarily less, may be more desirable. In relation to heart health, you need to think of your cholesterol in terms of, you've all gone to your GP. You get your cholesterol checked, and you're told, well, there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. The bad cholesterol is called the LDL, and essentially you want that to be below 4. The good guy here is HDL, or high density lipoprotein. And the reason why that's a good guy is because it mops up, it's a mechanism for mopping up all the excess cholesterol, which may be inside your artery or in a peripheral cell. It'll mop it up like a sponge, bring it to the liver, and then chuck it out of the bile where you excrete it in your feces, okay? So you want to keep that HDL up as far as you can. And the way you do that is by avoiding saturated fats. And again, you know about diet. You don't need me to tell you that you should reduce your amount of saturates. But what you should do is, again, eat better, perhaps less, and that's more desirable. But within the context of HDLs and keeping them up, 2 good ways is cardio aerobic exercise. So good brisk walk, and that will keep your HDLs up, and that means you've got the capacity to excrete HDLs. So it's not just about the saturates, but it's also a lot about the physical activity. Also, it's been demonstrated that a low dose of alcohol, so what I mean by that is a glass of wine a day, not 7 on Saturday, but 1 every day. And again, that increases HDL levels, and that's one of the reasons why the Mediterranean diet is thought to be so good. So I'm going to move now on to sarcopenia, which may be new to some of you. It was certainly new to me up to about 3 to 5 years ago. So essentially, sarcopenia is the loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength with age. If you've ever looked at an older person from the rear, you will see as they get older, their legs get very skinny, and more of the body weight goes on your main trunk. And that, again, is part of natural aging physiology. Everything sort of moves up. But it moves up because the skeletal mass reduces and all the fat mass stays on your trunk. And essentially, this happens particularly from your 40s, where you lose a progressive amount until your 70s. So just to see what happens, essentially, we lose about 1% of skeletal muscle mass per year between the age of 50 up to the age of 90. And that will be accentuated if, say, you've got, poor joints because you don't move as much. And even though joints may be sore, try to move as much as you can, because if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, essentially. If you feel sick, if you've got flu, of course, take those few days in bed. But bed rest is one of a really negative impact in terms of the inactivity, even for a week, has a very detrimental effect in relation to your skeletal muscle mass. And as you get older, literally, muscle will melt off clients or patients when they're in a bed. So that means even though if you have flu, get out of that bed as soon as you can. And even if it's only going for a walk, that's fine. But literally, if you don't move it, you're going to lose it. And also our bad weather. But anyhow. Okay, so this is a cross-section of two men. This is their thigh, and that's the thigh bone. And this is the skeletal muscle. And you can see around there, underneath the skin, you've got a little bit of adipose tissue. And this is what happens when you get older. You get more of the adipose around, and you get less skeletal mass. Okay, and that's just part of physiology. And we've been studying this to a certain extent, and I know some of our volunteers from Nutrimal are here, and I won't be able to show you any of the data because we haven't analysed everything, but I can give you the hows and the whys behind it so you understand our rationale and what we were trying to do. So with sarcopenia 10 years ago, you would know I trained as a dietitian initially, and you worked in a hospital, and you would be able to look at a client and you would be able to say they're sarcopenic because they're sort of smaller, frailer. You look at them from the back and they're very skinny and small. Whereas now you can't necessarily see sarcopenia because you see some of us are carrying extra weight, but it's fat weight, it's not skeletal weight. So that means we need to look at it and think of it beyond just weight and a scales. You have to think about the different sort of compartments in your body. So this is Nutrimal, which was a study that was funded by the Department of Agriculture. And essentially we were looking at novel nutritional solutions, looking at chronic malnutrition, specifically sarcopenia in the Irish population. And we had different stages of it. So we did a surveillance study, a very small pilot study with colleagues based in the HSE in sort of the South Dublin and Wicklow area to define the prevalence because we'd no Irish data. We did some cell work, and Gina was a PhD student who's doing all this work, and she's working out the molecular mechanisms in relation to how and why, and that'll fit in with the intervention study, which Keelan ran, which some of you might know. And then also a colleague based in Teagasc, Sinead McCarthy. She looked at consumer behaviour, which was really interesting. And I'm not presenting it today, but I'll just take a moment. You know when you go down the supermarket aisle, and if you had a baby, you're so proud to go down that aisle to buy the baby food and the infant formula and whatever. Do you ever go down the older person's aisle? You just won't. You see, and people are very proud, and people should be proud. But the food industry is trying to, one, figure out novel food solutions in terms of, okay, could we enrich with more vitamin D? Could we enrich with more protein? And Sinead did a lot of focus groups with older people, and older being, say, 50s and older people being 80s. And there was no way that lady was going to go down that aisle. So, you know, the food industry really has to come up with more elegant ways of selling their products. And one of the motivations that I actually had in relation to kicking off this study was that when you're older and when you're sick, the only thing you can sip is through a straw. And I thought, when I'm 80, the last thing I want to be doing is sipping my dinner through a straw. And really, it's up to the food industry to take that challenge and actually improve the foods that we have in order to reconfigure it such that people can enable their own health. So anyhow, that's my tuppence worth. So the first part we looked at, it was because essentially we had no Irish data. So a particularly bright PhD student at the time, Aoibhinn McMorris, she was a dietitian, she now works in St. James's. She surveyed almost 500 individuals who had a mean age of 78.5 and age range between 65 and 98. The mean BMI was 27, so they were, you know, a little bit overweight, but not too much, good range. But essentially, the prevalence of sarcopenia, depending on the way you define it, and again, this is one of the problems, the definitions aren't very clear-cut, and I would say that the prevalence of mild sarcopenia is probably 17% and severe is about 9%. So you're talking about that sort of prevalence, which is important and significant in terms of public health. Now, why do I worry about sarcopenia? Well, essentially it's because when you've got sarcopenia, your muscles aren't only smaller, they're not as strong. So that means that it's harder to stand up and not wobble. And if you wobble, there's a greater chance of you having a fall. And if you have a fall, you're stuck in a bed because you broke your hip. And then you're in this vicious cycle wherein you've got physical inactivity, and then the whole problem becomes much worse. So essentially, it's a matter of staying strong. And essentially, it does precipitate a greater risk of mortality. Now, in terms of what causes sarcopenia, there are lots of mechanisms, and I'm not going to bore you with them either today. But essentially, I'm going to focus on some of the nutritional solutions and some of the physical activity solutions. And the reason for that is that, you know, on one hand, you go to the GP, and he's telling you about your cholesterol. And then he's telling you what type of exercise to do. And then this professor in nutrition is telling you what to do, another type of exercise. And then you're getting confused. But I'm going to explain to you why you've got the different types of exercise which work in the different contexts depending on your health background. So essentially, the age-related causes of one of the single most important determinants of sarcopenia is physical inactivity and also poor protein intake. So inadequate intake because you don't eat very much. And there's this thing called anorexia of aging. Anorexia is just that feeling of not wanting to eat. Okay, and that's just part of physiology. But also our reduced ability to use available protein. And also older people probably have a greater need because we need more repair as you get a little bit older. So that's why you get this loss of functionality. So do we just eat more meat? Well, yes, to a certain extent, you know, but we've got a little bit more insights in relation to the different types of proteins and whatever. So habitual protein intake and skeletal muscle mass, this is a study that was conducted in the States. It was a lovely study conducted in over 2,000 men and women, and they were aged between 70 and 79. And essentially what they did was they assessed protein intake at the outset, and then they measured skeletal muscle mass loss over the next 3-year period. So it's called a prospective study. And these studies are really informative because then you go back to the baseline and you go, what was the single most important determinant of what happened to people? As in those people who lost lots of skeletal muscle mass or those people who lost very little. And essentially, this represents protein intake in grams per kilogram per day. So if you had the highest, or if you had the lowest, you had the greatest reduction in your skeletal muscle mass if you had the lowest protein intake. So if you were consuming, say, 0.7 grams per kilogram per day. So most women in this audience would be sort of 60, 70, 80 kilo, and then men would be sort of 80, 90, 100 kilos, so you can multiply by that. But those individuals who had a higher intake of protein, they actually had a much more attenuated or a lower reduction in skeletal muscle mass over that 3-year period. So the simple solution, reduce protein. Now we're looking at mechanisms, and I'm not going to bore you on the nitty-gritty, but sarcopenia is essentially due to age, your diet, and your physical activity. But with diet, it's suboptimal protein. And essentially, as I was trying to explain initially, it's these balances between synthesis and degradation. And essentially what happens is that balance between synthesis and degradation sort of goes off balance. So this is an illustration. Essentially, when you eat every day, if there's protein in that meal, this is called protein balance. And if you're above this black line, you're in positive protein balance, so you're making muscle. When you're in the fasted state, you break the muscle. So you eat your breakfast, and you get a surge of insulin and leucine, and you stimulate skeletal muscle protein metabolism. Then between your breakfast and your lunch, it dips down. Then after your lunch, it kicks up again. And then after your dinner, or after your lunch, it kicks down, and then it goes up again. So essentially, what's important here is that you have protein in these meals. Now, this is what happens in healthy young individuals. So they're in balance. So the gain is equivalent to the protein loss. But what happens when you get older is that that gain here is lower. So you get less bang for your buck, even if you're consuming exactly the same amount of protein, okay? So one way, and that's called anabolic resistance. You know anabolic hormones? So they build you up. So you're sort of resistant to being built up. So a way of getting over this is essentially by giving individuals more protein. So this is, again, it's a mechanistic study. So dietary protein stimulates muscle protein synthesis in a dose-response manner. Quite simply, this is the amount of protein people were given. Either none, 15 grams, 20 grams, and then nearly 50 grams. And you can see with young people, the more protein you give them, the more muscle synthesis you get. Unfortunately, the older ones of us are a little bit more like this. Okay, so you don't get the same effect from the same amount of protein. And that's why the protein recommendations are usually for young people, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. And for older people, it's 1 to maybe 1.2, depending on how healthy you are at the outset. So it is important when you're older to eat more protein. Now, what does 30 or 40 more protein means? To induce that skeletal muscle protein response, you have to take about 30 to 40 grams per day. So what does that mean? That is the equivalent of equivalent of 3/4 of a chicken breast. It's 3/4 of a litre of milk, which is a fair amount to consume. It is the equivalent in yogurts, it's 5 eggs. So that actually is a fair amount of protein to consume, say for your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner. And it would be pretty tough, okay? So again, it's not just all about quantity. But again, do you remember I showed you that over the day, the process goes up and goes down, goes up and goes down. So if you can sort of reconfigure your diet a little bit such that you put protein into most meals, then you're going to kickstart that process. Because usually people don't have protein in the breakfast. So for example, since we started Nutrimal, I've started to pile on yogurt on top of my cereal in the morning. So then at least I'm getting that kickstart in terms of trying to enhance skeletal muscle protein synthesis in the morning when I wouldn't have. Or scrambled eggs, or something like that. So it is fairly easy to do it, but it's not always possible to put in that 40 grams. So that's why we've been looking at the types of proteins that are in the diet. Yeah?
Is there protein in butter?
No, butter is all fat, but it's still, a small amount is fine. Okay? Okay, so we're back to this synthesis and degradation, and there's one amino acid. It's called leucine. It's a branched chain amino acid. We don't know why, but it's particularly effective, gram per gram, for stimulating skeletal muscle protein synthesis. The good news is it's present in a lot of dairy products. It's naturally enriched, okay? So it's been demonstrated, and essentially the way it works is that it kickstarts synthesis. And then it also, of course, because you're eating protein, you increase your total protein intake as well. So this was work done by Helen when she was based in McMaster in Canada, and essentially she looked at the impact of either a placebo protein or leucine in relation to skeletal muscle protein synthesis in older men, and you can see that essentially it did significantly increase it. So weight per weight, if you have proteins which are enriched in leucine, they're far better. Okay, because it is hard to get 30 or 40 grams of protein and not essential protein. So if we just have the fine nuggets, the most important amino acids, which are the building blocks, the better. So
how do you get leucine?
The branched chain amino acids, dairy products. And hopefully over time, particularly dairy, hopefully over time, some novel or some bright food industry partners will start making things which are more enriched. There's a bit of a problem with leucine. It's a very bitter taste. So again, you need food technology to sort of mask that taste, put it into nice foods, make it a little bit more palatable. So there's still a little bit of work to do, but it's work in progress and it will get there. Okay, so also you can put in other nutrients, and part of Nutrimal is we're looking at the effect of fish oils to see if they interact and synergize with the leucine, to see if we give both of those in combination, is it better? And that's because the fish oil part impedes the degradation. Okay, so again, we're trying to balance and rebalance. Okay, so some of you will recognize Helen, and she ran the intervention study that we did here. And just to give you some insight, so this was what we were trying to do, was to investigate whether the therapeutic effect of leucine, enriched protein supplement, improves skeletal muscle mass, strength, and physical performance. And could you improve that a little bit further if you put it with these very pure long-chain N3 pufas? Okay, so some of you were on this study, and you won't know which group you were in because it was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, because that's the best way you do studies. And you may have taken the control. You may have taken the leucine-enriched protein, which had this leucine extract in it, or the leucine with the long-chain N3 pufas. And hopefully in about a year, Helen will be here, and she'll be able to demonstrate to you whether or not we pushed the boat out and made things a little bit better, and who responded and who didn't respond. Because again, in this study, some people will respond just because that's the way they're made, and then other people don't. So now, I'm a nutritionist, and of course that's the most important, but as I said, physical activity is hugely important, particularly in the sarcopenia space. Also heart health as well, and diabetes and obesity. So you don't have to be these supersonic athletes, okay? But nevertheless, I wanted to take some time to reiterate how important physical activity, and it's particularly resistance exercise. When you go to your GP, they will promote activity and physical activity, but they usually talk about cardiometabolic, sort of walking, okay? That is good, and do as many steps as you can. But resistance exercise is essentially working against a weight, okay? So public parks now very often have things in which, even cycling, stationary bicycles, that you're going to strengthen your thigh muscles. And that'll mean with age, you still will be able to get out of that chair. And you won't be quite as wobbly because your legs are a little bit stronger. They also have sort of push-up things. So again, for upper arm strength, do use those. Or there are other active retirement organizations. There are, and just seek them out, but particularly in relation to strength and conditioning, okay? Because that's the component. It's not only the aerobic exercise, but it certainly is the resistance exercise. Okay, now the way it works is, and we've got this little cartoon here, and we had the balance. So resistance exercise, if you were going to be a weightlifter, and again, you don't have to do that. But remember, a litre of milk is a kilo. So even if you wanted to push up with that, that's fine. So with a meal and resistance exercise, you essentially accentuate that curve, okay? You accentuate this component, so you make more protein and you reduce the breakdown part. And that's how it works. And that's why it's really important to do the weight-bearing exercise or the resistance exercise, because again, you sort of have to damage proteins or damage your skeletal muscle using the physical activity, because it sort of goes into a repair phase. And then if you couple what you eat with what you exercise, so during the 2 hours after physical activity, particularly resistance exercise, that 2-hour window, for whatever reason, the body is far more receptive to the protein. Okay, so an awful lot of this intelligence has come from the performance nutrition area, where you've got athletes who are taking, say, whey supplements. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating those at all, but dairy, yogurts, etc. In those 2 hours after physical activity, it actually will be incorporated into your skeletal muscle and promote synthesis even further. So that's why the doublet is really important. So there we have the cartoon. So essentially it's the milk, as it were, and also the resistance exercise. Now, so what do you do? And all of you are engaged. All of you are interested in health. So I don't need to introduce the food pyramid to you. I don't need to tell you what you need to do, because you've got a fairly good idea of what you need to do. But as we get older, if I was going to prioritize different levels of the food pyramid, it would be here with the protein components such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs, beans, and nuts, which we're supposed to take 2 servings per day. But also don't forget about the milk, yogurts, and cheese, where you're supposed to take 3 servings per day. And they not only provide, the proteins, but they also provide the micronutrients that we need, the calciums, the vitamin D, the vitamin A, all those different micronutrients. They really are so important as you get older. And then it's the whole cereals. They're there for energy, the vegetables, the fruit, and the salad. But really, focus on those. But also try to do them 3 times a day or 4 times a day, because you're trying to get to that dose of 30 grams per eating occasion. And that's a fair amount of protein. But nevertheless, if you try to spread it throughout the day, that'll sort of help things a huge amount. And then get a dog, get out there and do your steps. And that's sort of easier. And don't be too shy in terms of trying to think of ways in which you can bring resistance exercise into your day. And I was trying to think of an organisation, the League of Health, for example. They are a fantastic organisation. And like, it's just you move it, or otherwise you're going to lose it. And you've got the social component in terms of the active living, as it were. So before I wrap up, I would like to acknowledge my crew who work here on Nutrimal, particularly Keelan and Aveen and Gina and Lorraine, Claire and Giuseppe, and also Sinead, who works in Chagas. And also, I'm not the only person who works on ageing and malnutrition. My colleague, both Claire Corrish and Eileen Gibney, they're involved in leading an EU programme which is looking at malnutrition in the elderly. And even though malnutrition is hugely prevalent in Ireland, but we still don't have the proper tools to measure it. So that's what they were trying to do. And they were trying to align these measurement and assessment tools across Europe. So that, because it's not as if the Irish are so different to the Dutch or the French. We're not. But if we can actually amalgamate our data sets, if we can integrate our data, then with the collective knowledge and expertise, we really can solve these problems much faster in a collaborative fashion. Our colleagues in the Netherlands are particularly good in the nutrition field, and we're good friends with them, and we work with them. And that's why we've been able to move through this space at a much greater rate, and it's because of those collaborations. And also my colleague Lorraine Brennan, she's also got another study which is called Optiage, and that's looking at B vitamins. And essentially they're looking at that within the context of, say, blood pressure, bone health, and the microbiome, which you've heard of. And again, in a year or two, the data from that will be coming forward. And with that, I've given you a couple of resources, and I'll ask Ger maybe to put some of those links on the website if you're interested. They're sort of national programs. They're a good go-to place to get information, because in the nutrition field, everybody's an expert, and they should be, because food is very important. Food is a really important component of life and sociality, as it were. And you don't necessarily need a nutritionist or a professor to tell you, what you need to do or don't need to do. But go to those reliable sources of information, not only on the nutrition side, but also on the physical activity side. And with that, I'd be delighted to take any questions. If you've got any comments, if you don't agree with me, it's fine. We'll kick off.